Unfortunately, the presentation I prepared gives an overview that nobody else has quite said yet, but in different parts has said. So I can add something else. I'm going to use a bit of notes because in the Castro style, I could speak for days. So I'm going to try and stick to the subject because we've got other speakers as well. But what I wanted to talk about is how we can link the international struggles and how we show the linkage between things, and how we need to understand the struggle is international, and the struggle for socialism and against imperialism must be global, it must be international, and also the solidarity of peoples all over the world. And to understand, because I've been lucky to be able to travel to many countries in the world, in Asia, in North America, and in Europe, and other parts that, various parts of the world, and in Africa, of course, to see struggles in different places. And as you said, we went to Cuba, and spent 3 weeks in Cuba, which was an amazing experience in itself, especially if you go as a delegation and you're politically going to Cuba, so you're involved in activity, living in a Cuban home, and that experience was phenomenal. And also on the youth camp with the Cuban cockroaches as well. I always remember that. But nevertheless, we was on the youth camp with all the other people who were there visiting the island at the time, so it was a phenomenal experience to be among that. So I just wanted to try and give a bit of context to that struggle, really. The thing is that all the struggles in the world, all the different things we mention, is a form of class struggle, and it's something that is so important, the importance of class struggle. So we talk about the resistance to the police, we talk about people resisting at so many different levels. If we talk about women resisting racism, we talk about the women in India resisting the rapes and the attacks on women there. We talk about any of the kind of struggles around the world. People see them often initially as local problems, and it's only when they start to speak to people, and when I say local, I mean very local. I mean, we talk about Tottenham, local. People in Tottenham thinking it's a Tottenham issue, people thinking it's a Haringey issue, people thinking it's a London issue, people thinking it's an urban issue. And then once they start to talk about these issues, you see the connections when they start, as Minka said, people who join a campaign like that get exposed to people like Minka and other people, where they start to see, actually, this happened to somebody else in London, this happened to somebody in Manchester, this happened to somebody in Birmingham. And then they start to see it happen to somebody in the United States, in different parts of the United States, and it's happening in all different parts of the world. And then they begin to see that the struggle is much bigger than the struggle that they've had. And just initially, we know that many of the parents, and we can't blame the parents for this or the families for this is just a fact, that the families want justice for their particular child or their particular family member, and not all of them necessarily get into the wider struggle, but many of them do. So the point I'm making is we enter the struggle through different journeys, through different routes. I've entered the struggle for socialism from a background of working struggle. So I was in trade union movement. I joined the trade union movement, but I was also a black nationalist. Anybody who knows the area I grew up in northwest London, in Harlesden. I was very influenced by the Rastas and different people at that time. So I connected those two struggles, and I still remember going to a union meeting, black workers group meeting, and it was members of Minka's old organisation, where they said it's good that all of us socialists have come together. And I remember looking at the Rasta guy that was next to me, and we protested. Why are you saying that we're all socialists? We're just trade unionists, we're not socialists. Because at that time, I associated socialism with a Euro-left kind of anti-African kind of movement that had nothing to do with our struggles. Of course, what did I know about socialism? What I challenge people today, I didn't know anything about socialism, never read one book about socialism. Of course, I never knew anything about socialism. I just knew the same type of propaganda we hear about the DPRK and this nonsense that we heard about other things. But what was a natural thing was that when you link the movement that I was involved in, which was the trade union movement, and particularly the black workers movement, which was a unification of peoples of colour, because I've got the experience of working with all different people in the black workers group. So that solidarity, that international solidarity, was something I experienced at a very young age. And then with the black nationalism and my interest in Africa, working with this Rasta, who was one of my role models, sadly he passed a few years ago, but is a brother that was a massive role model to me, because he kept talking about Africa. He always kept talking about Africa. He's from Jamaica, kept talking about Africa. So I was constantly talking to him about this question: why do you call yourself African? So I started to learn about that, and during that journey, the natural marriage between the trade union movement and the black nationalist struggle was the revolutionary Pan-Africanist struggle. So there was a kind of a marriage there. So unlike many people who were born in this country, I was born in this country, unfortunately, but I was born in this country, many people came to socialism through reading Marx and Lenin. I think I've only read one book by Lenin, and other elements of Marx and Lenin, but I think one book by Lenin. So in other words, I came through to socialism by reading about from African writers. So all the African writers who made my contribution to understanding the socialist struggle. So people come from different angles. So it's just important that I wanted to make that point. And as I said, people can be local, can be regional, national, and then international. And we see in the AAPRP one of our clear jobs to do with a small organization, but one of our clear jobs to do is try to bring the international context and the broader context to the struggles that people are involved in. So whatever angle we get involved with people, whether it's young people or whatever, is to try and show them. And we developed sessions, public sessions, where we had a range of subjects. We had hardcore subjects, you might say, like the 50th anniversary of Cuba, Palestine against Zionism. But also we had some other softer subjects about the role of music in the African community and stuff like that. Different ways to try and reach out to people in our community to see and hear about different things. But also I refuse not to do some of the more hardcore events, because if you never ever talk about the hardcore, I'm calling it hardcore, but that's because it's just the language I use. But if you never talk about these other wider issues, people think that the only thing you ever talk about is the soft, small issues in the community. So we have to constantly show that link. But sometimes you also have to have subjects that the general public, people who are only slightly politicized, can come to, because to come to an event like this, the vast majority of people just won't attend it. So we have to do that mix. I wanted something that Minka raised. I'll give a different quote. A threat to justice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, is something that Martin Luther King said. Because one of the things is about the Obamas of this world and other people, or people who are misquoted like Martin Luther King, because it's easy to misquote, or not to so misquote, but put an emphasis on people like Martin Luther King and not some of the more radical messages that he talked about. And this was one of the key ones, is about the internationalization of justice. And similar with Malcolm X, it's easy to show Malcolm X as some kind of crazed person and this image with a gun. It's probably the only time Malcolm ever had a gun, was when his property was bombed after he had differences with the Nation of Islam, and actually carried a gun after that period, not during the period. So that image of him having a gun is actually the image that so many people portray as if he was a violent person, when actually, if you look at all the work he did, there was never any evidence of violence, but he was prepared to take violent action if necessary, because he didn't believe in just turning the other cheek. And he saw that, you know, violence was just or non-violence was just a tactic, it wasn't a principle. And even Martin Luther King, in his later years, if you see some of the texts and some of these conversations, he was saying he was finding it increasingly difficult to argue for non-violence in a very violent American situation. So I wanted to just address the Pan-Africanist struggle a bit to demonstrate this international solidarity, because in the Pan-Africanist struggle we have a long history of this international solidarity. So it's important to see the links between places like the DPRK and our love of the DPRK. I mean, we have work study, we have a study program. We believe that, you know, to liberate or to be in the political struggle, we must have political education. It's very, very important. We know of people who have been in struggles, who have just decided, to hell with it, we're just going to get some guns and get some brothers and we're just going to go out there. And look at the consequences in somewhere like Sierra Leone. Within my short lifetime, we've got connections with people who made that terrible error, who said that without the political education, without the political structure, got frustrated and decided to start organizing people, getting guns and just saying, let's just take the government out. But then in the end, they kill more of their own people than they're killing the enemy, because of the political confusion and the whole just confusing attitude and the whole situation that they find themselves in. And we see this in some of the coups in Africa as well. But the Pan-Africanist struggle was formalized, because many people see the Pan-African struggle with the beginning of the Pan-African Congresses. But the Pan-African struggle had gone on since the incursions into Africa. So it was there for hundreds of years before. But the term and the phrase and the coordinated effort of a Pan-African struggle really came about in the diaspora around 1900, with that sort of structured, organized approach to it. And then we saw the mass formation of it with the Garvey movement and the UNIA, where they had the mass feature with 5-6 million members at a time when we had no internet, at a time when we had no you know, email or Skype or anything like that to organise on that massive scale, mostly with seamen who travelled across the world who could represent and give out the magazines around the world. Even the people like the ANC say they were linked to things like the UNIA and the founding in 1916. So we see this internationalization. So we also saw the Pan-African movements going up to the 5th Pan-African Congress, where we say Pan-Africanism went home to Africa, where really that was the first time that Africans from home really managed to organize themselves, because as colonized people they couldn't travel easily. And again, this is a great example of international solidarity, because what happened in 1945? 1945, most people think of the so-called Second World War, the Second Imperialist War. But actually in 1945 also there was a Congress. There was the working class of the trade union movement had a Congress. And on the back of the Congress, it allowed lots of Africans to travel to England to a Pan-African Congress on the back of pretending to go to a trade union Congress, which I'm sure they attended as well. And that was the nature of the situation, because in 1945, who in Africa could travel to England without a colonial master saying they could get a passport or get some travel documents? So that's how they did it. So that shows an example of international solidarity, coming to England for a trade union congress and then having the Pan-African Congress. And then we see the wider movement of international solidarity, that the Pan-African struggle has always had unity with peoples like the DPRK. And we love the idea of the Juche idea because it's an ideology from their culture. And we in the AAPRP, we say we're incrumeris terreis. So we believe in that ideology from our culture. So yes, we see Marx and Lenin as people who, or the books and the ideas and the methodologies, we see them as methodologies. But our ideology, we believe, must be based on our culture and our reality. So that's why we'll call ourselves incrumeris terreis. And I'm sure in the DPRK, similarly, they'll teach the methodologies of Marx and Lenin as a key critique of capitalism and a reaction to capitalism. But they also have developed the Juche idea, which comes from their culture, which takes it to another level to say we need to embrace the culture and reality of our condition and our situation, which has some areas of uniqueness. But that doesn't stop their internationalization of the whole process. So time is running, but to show the other examples, we've had the unity, of course, with the peoples of the Palestine. And our organization has traveled to all these places, as well as having solidarity at our platforms. African Liberation Day, I was only talking to the sister there from the Kurdish movement. And in 1992, with the so-called 500th anniversary of the loss of the boat that Christopher Columbus got lost in the Americas, because we all know he got lost. He was looking for India and he got lost. And now we're called the West Indies, of all places. It's just crazy. But he got lost, and that 500th anniversary America wanted to celebrate. So of course the American Indians organized themselves, the indigenous people organized themselves to resist massively that 500-year celebration, to turn it into an anti-imperialist resistance. And we invited American Indian to African Liberation Day to be the keynote speaker in 1992. And that's an example of always the solidarity that we've been involved in. We've had Palestinian speakers, we've had Jews come to speak at our events. When we did an anti-Zionist event, we had white Jews to come to speak against why they're against Zionism, which we thought was very, very significant to have that and popularize that. And we've had solidarity with all sorts of, all peoples of the world, from obviously with Cuba and so many other peoples of the world. So what I wanted to just conclude is just to sort of talk about the inspiration for people, that we get involved at different levels, but at some point we need to show people that there is no real solution. We're not saying we don't fight. We must have the campaigns, we must resist, and we can't just sit down and wait for the revolution to come. We have to show resistance at all levels, but we also need to demonstrate to our people that there is no real solution. We have to be honest to our people. There is no real permanent solution unless we broaden the struggle to a wider international struggle for socialism and defeat imperialism in every part of the world. Because the police brutality, you get justice. This case may or may not convict a police officer. Now, if it convicts a police officer, we can say that's a victory, and it is a victory of the people, because that wouldn't happen if the people weren't organised. But the danger is that we think that there's a conclusion, in a sense, that, oh, British justice isn't that bad because, look, a police officer gets prosecuted. So we have to keep on showing that the friends and family and these people, to try and get them politicised, to go for a more permanent, long-term struggle, to realise that they're linked to all the other struggles of oppressed people and the economic conditions that we're having in Missouri in the United States or anywhere else in the world is all linked to the same system. And we have to understand that there is no short-term solution to these problems unless we have a wider solution and an alternative. And an interesting note, again, before I finish, is that it's very important that we have this political education, as I said, and permanent organisation. But one thing we must do is understand economics. And one of the things I would love to do in the short term is visit the DPRK and find out a bit more about their economic plans, find out more about places like Cuba. I did some research into China. I spoke on that just last week about what China has done to dramatically change the conditions of the people. Because I believe that socialism in the so-called 20th century has demonstrated to the world we've won all the major arguments. All the major arguments on women, on race, on equality, on the role of children, on the abuse of all sorts of abuses, on land and labour. We've won all the major arguments, but where we haven't excelled or been able to excel because of imperialism, we accept, is the economics. So it's one of the things I would like to raise today, to say that it's something that we as socialists must do more, to talk about economics and learn from the examples of how we can develop our people, because at the end of the day, people don't love ideology. Those political people like me who live and die for politics, we love ideology. But the majority of people out there in the street, they say they can't eat ideology. Okay, they can't eat it. Okay, so one of the things we must bring is we must bring the social solutions to our people, because whatever we say we believe in, if our people are starving and hungry and we're not resolving their contradictions, they will stop believing in whatever it is you say you believe in. People will vote for whatever they believe will resolve their contradictions, even if they're fooled into voting for Labour or Conservative or whatever. We must have an alternative. So it's all right to say what we're against, but we must develop what we're for. So time is short. I hope that's given you a broader view of the Pan-African struggle.